Democrats are celebrating after the stunning results in Alabama last night. In a rebuke of President Trump and his ally Steve Bannon, voters in that deeply red state chose a Democrat for the first time in a quarter century to send to Washington. Well, today Trump said he endorsed Roy Moore because he wanted to hold on to the Republican Senate seat. Let's watch.
A lot of Republicans feel differently. They're very happy with the way it turned out. But I would have, as the leader of the party, I would have liked to have had the seat. I want to endorse the people that are running.
Well, Richard Shelby, the senior senator from Alabama, pointedly refused to endorse Moore, saying Alabama deserved better. Here was Senator Shelby today.
The people of Alabama spoke, talked to Doug Jones 30, 40 minutes ago, congratulated him. I've known him a long time, and I told him that I look forward to working with him up here for great interest of the nation and the people of Alabama. I think basically the voters, or the majority of the voters in my state, chose principle over politics.
Principle over politics. Well, Doug Jones rode to victory thanks to a coalition of support from young people, women, and African Americans mostly, who voted in record numbers. 96% of black voters said they backed Jones, and he turned out in big numbers. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, he was a big winner yesterday. He campaigned for Doug Jones. He said it felt like a movement down in Alabama, but he also credited moderate Republicans. Let's watch.
This was an extraordinary grassroots effort by a lot of folks that were working on the field, not just for weeks, but for months, even before these allegations came out. And when I was down there, I was calling back to people here in the Senate and telling them this is not a campaign. This has a movement feel to it. This was a choice between someone who is about bigotry, about hate, about misogyny, that was violating the rule of law. I mean, his career is a stain on the ideals that we hold precious, and so many Republicans rejected that, including my colleague Richard Shelby, who has a profile of courage for him to come out days before the election as strongly as he did.
Well, in my book, for what it's worth, that senator's stock is rising very high after his performance down in Alabama. Cory Booker looks like a big winner coming out of that because he looked good there. He was right about the whole thing. It wasn't just the African-American vote. It was also moderate Republicans really turning away from a bad candidate. There are huge questions now, none of them good for Republicans. What does the Jones victory mean for the Trump agenda in the Congress? Will the blame gaming in the Republican Party itself make the GOP even more unruly? But most important was yesterday, the start of a Democratic wave that will crest next year. Will it be that? Do the Democrats have a good shot of taking back not just the House next year, which they had a good shot at, but the U.S. Senate as well? Joining me right now is somebody who should know, U.S. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of State of Texas, John Hammontree, managing producer for the Alabama Media Group, and Jennifer Rubin. We know her often, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Let me go to Congresswoman Lee, Jackson Lee. What do you think is the trajectory coming out of yesterday's vote in Alabama?
That we haven't won the final race, but we're on a very good target, and we are working and running at a pace for victory. I think Democrats recognize that yesterday was stupendous, and all of the Democratic help from senators and congresspersons like Congresswoman Terry Sewell made a difference. 98% of that vote was African-American women. They obviously said to America that we're going to be your rescuers. But what it does say is that there can be coalitions with moderate Republicans, maybe in some hard-to-win states, blue-collar workers, along with our wonderful base of young people, Hispanics, working Americans. And so Alabamans really put the big tent together that represents the Democratic Party. That should be a big threat for Republicans, because Republicans have tried to go it alone on a single race community, single issues that divides Americans. And here we had whites and blacks and Hispanics, LGBT, religious community, and certainly a large number of African-American women combined with white women that made a difference in Alabama. I think that's a winning combination, and what the Republicans have is nothing but toxic, and it is not going to sell in 2018.
Yeah, I'm going to say a big, loud amen to what you just said at the end of the show, Congressman. Thank you for starting the show this way. Donald Trump was one of the only national Republicans to endorse Roy Moore and even record a robocall for him. That's what he did, the president did. But he downplayed that role today. He tweeted, "The reason I originally endorsed Luther Strange, and his numbers went up mightily, is that I said Roy Moore will not be able to win the general election. I was right. This is Trump speaking. Roy worked hard, but the deck was stacked against him. Let me go to John Hammontree on that. What do you think was these elections are decided, as you saw, by 2 or 3 points. This one went the way of the Democratic candidate. It was an upset. What was it that did it?
Yeah, it's hard to say that the deck was stacked against Roy Moore when Democrats typically lose by 20 to 30 points in the state of Alabama. And it was every single thing mattered. Senator Booker coming to town and former President Obama recording a robocall. Those certainly helped drive out African-American vote. Even Charles Barkley may have helped drive out African-American vote. But the courage of Senator Shelby to come out and speak against his own party's nominee certainly helped lead to either the overwhelming and record number of crossover voters that we've seen, as well as the record number of write-in votes that we've seen. And every single thing added up to a very, very narrow margin of victory. But the Democrats pulled it out.
You know, there's been a lot of conversation. I'll get back to the Congresswoman. I'll get back to you, Congresswoman, right on this question, because I think it's right in your wheelhouse here. People thought that only Obama, the president, could bring out the African-American vote. It had to be a positive reason to go vote. Here's a chance to keep the first black president. That's a great call. But now it seems like there was nothing really positive to get excited about then. There was something negative to get excited about, making sure this guy, Trump's guy, didn't win. Tell me, how did that energize the community, do you think?
Thank you. Let me first say, I'm excited, Chris, that we elected a Southern Democrat. I want there to be a big across the nation announcement in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and every media source. We now have a full-fledged Southern Democrat United States Senator. And how did that come about? Because we have thinking voters. African Americans are thinking voters. And what they did was they voted their issues. They voted their dignity. They didn't want someone who said we were happy during slavery. They didn't want someone who preyed upon young girls, because we as African American women knows what that has been throughout history. They wanted someone who would respect them. And let me just say this. Senator Shelby, as was said earlier, was a profile in coverage, and he put a sharp contrast between President Trump, who frankly I believe is becoming a non-entity. President Trump did a robocall. President Trump endorsed Mr. Moore, and as well caused the Republican National Committee to do so. In doing that, he showed that he was completely irrelevant in this process. It was close, but we did something that no one expected us to do, was to pull out a Southern Democrat to now represent the United States Senate, to represent Alabama in the United States Senate. So I think the story is we're back to our big tent Democratic Party with Southern Democrats, people from diverse backgrounds who can sit in the same tent together, from East Coast to West Coast to North to South. And the president has been marginalized by his own party, Republicans, McConnell, and others who stepped aside from this man, Mr. Moore, who had this long history of being a child predator. And I will just say this, as you well know, in the Judiciary Committee, I question about the women who made charges against Mr. Trump. And I want them to have a place to have their complaints heard. I asked the Deputy Attorney General, can these women who have never been heard from a president who said he would sue them, and he's never done so, and he's a chief law enforcement officer, I think the Department of Justice should open an investigation on the complaints of these women if they make that complaint to the DOJ. And I've indicated in my public statement, as the Deputy Attorney General said, that they can do that.